From a young age, I was always the responsible one. I was the one who set the table, who helped with the bills, and who took care of keeping the house in order. Meanwhile, Leo was the favorite. I was the shadow, the solution to the problems that no one else wanted to face. Back then, I thought that was normal. After all, what else could I do? He was the youngest, and I was the older sister. I had to understand. But over time, the dynamic became unbearable. When I opened my online store, I hoped that would change something. I thought that maybe they would see the effort I was making to build something with my own hands, the sleepless nights, the weekends working, the days when I barely ate to save and reinvest in the business. But no, for my parents, I was simply doing what was expected of me. For Leo, I was an obstacle. He had a terrifying ability to turn any situation into an advantage for himself. If something went wrong, it was my fault. If something went right, he found a way to be praised for it. And my parents simply agreed, as if it all made sense. I never understood how someone could get away with so many things. That night, I was exhausted. I had just finished planning a new collection for the store, something that could really boost sales. When I went into the kitchen for dinner, I heard Leo laughing on the sofa, accompanied by the sound of another game on his phone. "Hey, can you make less noise? I'm trying to think about something important for work," I asked. He laughed mockingly. "Maybe you should relax a little. It's not like your little store is going to change the world." That hit me like a punch. I took a deep breath, swallowing my pride, and went back to my room. It wasn't worth arguing. Not with someone who would always be shielded by my parents. But still, something inside me burned. Why was I never the priority? Over the weeks, the atmosphere became heavier. Every time Leo made fun of my work or did everything possible to mess up the place where I worked, I felt like something inside me was about to explode. The last straw came one Saturday morning when I woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. I left my room and saw, dumbfounded, my belongings thrown in the garden, clothes, documents, even the notebooks with the store's plans were scattered like trash. "Leo, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't even bother to look at me. "Finally doing something useful. This place is too small for your junk." I went straight to my parents, still believing that they would intervene. "Are you seeing this? He's throwing my things away." My mother looked away, pretending to be busy with the dishes. My father simply sighed. "Clara, don't make this bigger than it is. You know how Leo is." For a moment, I was speechless. It was as if my whole life had been reduced to that phrase, "You know how Leo is." And I knew how they were. They wouldn't do anything. They never did. Without saying another word, I went back to my room. I started to pick up what I could, with tears burning in my eyes but without letting them fall. Something inside me was changing. This time, it wouldn't just be about Leo or my parents, it was about me. And I knew that from that moment on. I had to change everything. It was still hard to believe that my parents had allowed that. I spent the rest of the day trying to reorganize the chaos that Leo had created, picking up my things from the garden as if I were a stranger invading my own home. Every piece of clothing, every notebook I picked up seemed to weigh a ton. It wasn't just the physical work, it was the weight of the humiliation. I felt my eyes burning, but I refused to cry. Not in front of them. Not this time. After hours of tidying up, I went to my room and locked the door. The feeling of being surrounded by the walls that I used to call home now seemed like a warning that I no longer belonged there. I leaned against the door, taking a deep breath, trying to calm the avalanche of thoughts that was drowning me. I was always told that family was everything, that I had to respect, forgive, understand. But how far does that understanding go? Until I ceased to exist. The silence in the room was interrupted by the sound of the TV in the living room. Leo was laughing loudly as if nothing had happened. And I could hear my mother's voice saying something about dinner. How could they act as if it were just any day? As if throwing my things into the garden was normal. I felt a knot in my throat, a mixture of sadness and anger. And I took my phone. I sent a message to a friend. "Can I stay at your place for a few days? I need to get out of here." The answer came quickly, "Of course. Friend. Come whenever you need." And I knew that I needed it. Now. I had no other option. That night, while packing the little I could take with me, I heard a knock on the door. My heart raced, hoping for maybe an apology, some kind of remorse. But it was my mother. She entered with that look of someone who wants to talk but without really taking sides. "Honey, you don't have to make this a storm. You know Leo is young. He sometimes exaggerates. You know how he is." There it was again. That phrase, "you know how he is." I took a deep breath and turned to her. "Mom, I'm tired of always knowing how he is. And when are you going to understand how I am? I'm the one who makes the effort, who works, who carries this house on my back while you treat Leo like a baby. I can't take it anymore." She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time, she seemed speechless. Maybe because deep down, she knew I was right. But as always, her loyalty to Leo was stronger. "Just don't do anything rash. Clara, your brothers. This will pass," she said, leaving me alone with my things scattered on the floor. But at that moment, I decided that I wasn't going to wait for something that would never change. I threw the last clothes into my suitcase and looked at the room one last time. It was strange to think that this place where I had so often dreamed of a better future was now the symbol of what I had to leave behind. When I crossed the living room, Leo didn't even look at me. My parents were in the kitchen, pretending to be too busy to say goodbye. I closed the door behind me with a force that to me sounded like the final point of a story that I no longer wanted to continue writing. As I walked down the dark street with my suitcase in one hand and my patched-up dreams in the other, I felt something new. It wasn't fear. Although it was terrifying to leave without knowing what would come, it was determination. I didn't know how, but I knew that I would never again be the shadow of my own life. My friend's house was small, but it welcomed me as if it were a palace. As soon as I arrived, she hugged me and said, "You're not alone. Clara, you have a space to breathe here." It was all I needed to hear at that moment. Although it was hard for me to put my pride aside and accept help. The first night, while I settled on the small sofa in the living room, I looked at the ceiling, trying to organize my thoughts. There were so many unanswered questions. How could they let this happen? Would they ever regret it? And how would I start again? But above all, the doubt that hammered in my head was whether I had done the right thing by leaving. Despite everything, guilt visited me like an old acquaintance, whispering that perhaps I had gone too far. But then, the sound of Leo's laughter echoed in my memory, erasing any trace of doubt. I needed this new beginning. In the first few days, I felt like I was floating in a void. It was strange not to have my routine at my parents' house, even if it was a suffocating routine. Still, between confusion and exhaustion, I began to reorganize my life. I transformed my friend's kitchen table into an improvised office. And each day, I woke up with the goal of growing my store. If there was something I could control, it was that. I worked tirelessly, spending hours fixing the website, researching new marketing strategies, and planning a new collection. My business was small, but it was mine. And that meant everything. Every sale that came in was like a confirmation that I was capable. That even without the support of my family, I could prosper. Still, there were moments of silence in which reality hit me like a punch. At night, in the darkness of the sofa, I faced the idea that I was now completely alone. I no longer had a place that I could call home. At least not in the traditional sense. I was my own fortress. And that was both empowering and terrifying. One day, while I was organizing the boxes of a new shipment of products, my friend entered the living room with 2 cups of coffee and a smile that tried to hide her worry. "You know you're doing well, right?" she said, sitting next to me. "But I think you need to breathe from time to time. You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders." I laughed, but there was a lump in my throat. It was strange to hear someone worry about me without expecting anything in return. Maybe that was what I was discovering. That it was possible to build a new life with people who chose to be by my side. And not out of obligation. That night, while I was looking at the store's website and seeing how sales were starting to grow, I felt a small spark of hope. It was as if the universe was telling me that I had made the right decision. It was still early. There was still much to do. But for the first time in a long time, I felt that I was walking in the right direction. Then the phone rang. I looked at the screen, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw my mother's name. For a second, I thought about not answering, but something in me wanted to hear what she had to say. I answered. And her voice on the other end sounded different. Heavier. More hesitant. Clara. Can we talk? My stomach tightened. I knew that the call wasn't just an apology. Something had changed. But I had no idea what was about to happen. I answered the phone, trying to keep my voice firm. But my mother seemed disarmed. Clara. Dear. We need your help. Her tone was different from usual. Without her usual confidence or authority. For a moment, I felt disconnected. As if I were listening to a stranger. We're having trouble paying the rent. We don't know what to do. Confusion took over me for a few seconds. How? It was surreal to imagine that even after everything that had happened, she thought that she could simply call me and expect me to solve things as before. You mean you want me to pay the rent? I asked, trying not to sound as incredulous as I felt. Yes, dear. Just until we sort everything out. You know things are difficult for Leo, he's still adjusting to finding a job. And your father and I, well, the situation isn't good for either of us. Her voice was almost pleading, but not enough to disguise the ingrained habit of justifying Leo. I closed my eyes, trying to process the audacity of that request. Did they really believe that after throwing me out of the house, I was simply going to accept taking on the role of supporting them again? I took a deep breath before answering. Mom, with all due respect, ask Leo to pay. After all, he threw me out of the house. And you sided with him. Now it's time for him to take responsibility. The silence on the other end of the line seemed endless. Finally, she replied in a trembling voice. Clara, don't talk like that. You know he's young. He's trying. I hung up before she could finish. And I'm young too. Mom, I spent years trying to do everything for you while he did nothing. Now I'm focused on my life. You made a choice when you took his side. Now accept the consequences. I hung up before she could answer, feeling my heart race and my hands tremble. It wasn't easy to say those words, but they were necessary. For so long, I had carried the weight of responsibilities that were not mine, and now I was finally freeing myself. But despite the firmness, the echo of the conversation tormented me for the rest of the day. Working in the store seemed more difficult, as if every sale and every task was shrouded in a cloud of thoughts. I wondered if my decision had been too harsh, if I should have tried to help in some way. But then I remembered the complacent look on my parents' faces while Leo threw my things outside. No, they needed to learn. 3 days later, while I was organizing the store's deliveries, I heard loud knocks on the apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a moment before opening. When I saw who was on the other side, my body froze. It was Leo, with an expression I had never seen before. He looked dejected, almost ashamed. Can we talk? He asked, and his voice was so low that it seemed to belong to someone else. I looked at him, not knowing what to think. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, but another part wanted to hear what he had to say. After all, it wasn't every day that my brother showed up asking for something other than a favor. I let him in, but without saying a word. He seemed uncomfortable, as if he didn't know where to start. Finally, he sighed and looked at me. I made a mistake. I don't even know where to start, but I want to apologize. That was the beginning of something I wasn't expecting. And although I didn't know if I should believe him, I realized that I needed to hear what else he had to say. Leo entered my apartment as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. For the first time, he seemed vulnerable, almost small, quite the opposite of the haughty and carefree attitude he always showed. I closed the door, crossing my arms, while he stood in the middle of the room, not knowing where to put his hands or how to start. I wasn't interested in making things easy for him. You have 5 minutes, I said bluntly. I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't there for him to feel comfortable or to waste time with empty apologies. He nodded, taking a breath as if preparing for a rehearsed speech. I know I messed everything up, he began. His voice was low, and his eyes, which usually avoided eye contact, were fixed on mine. I was an idiot with you, with our parents, with everything. And now everything is falling apart. I crossed my arms more tightly, keeping my face impassive, although my mind was already fighting an avalanche of thoughts. He continued. After you left, I realized that you did everything. And when the bills started to arrive, I finally understood what you went through every day. He rubbed his hands on his face as if the words were hard to form. I don't know how to apologize for everything. I just wanted you to know that I regret it. I laughed. But it was a cold, humorless laugh. You regret it because now you feel firsthand what I went through. Or because you realized that you can no longer hide behind our parents while someone solves everything for you. He lowered his head. Ashamed. Both. I know I have no excuse. And I know you have no reason to forgive me. But I wanted to try to fix things. That took me by surprise. Leo wanting to fix something wasn't the kind of phrase I would hear from someone who had always gone through life without worrying about the consequences. But at the same time, it wasn't that simple. Leo, what do you think fixing things means? Apologize and pretend nothing happened? Because it doesn't work like that. He shook his head quickly. I know I can't turn back time. But I want to change. I want to help our parents. I want to be a better person. I just need time. The tone of his voice carried an honesty that disarmed me a little, but not enough to make me forget everything that had happened. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain control of the situation. Leo, you're right about one thing. I have no reason to forgive you. And I won't. Not yet. He looked at me, surprised, but said nothing. I took the opportunity to continue. I'm not going back home. I'm not going to pay our parents' bills. And I'm not going to solve the problems that you yourselves created. But if you're serious about changing, the only thing I can say is that you're going to have to work hard. Start by finding a job. Help our parents. And maybe one day I'll be able to believe in you. He nodded. His expression still burdened but with something that seemed to be determination appearing in his eyes. I will. I'm going to prove you wrong about me. It's not about whether I'm wrong or not, Leo. It's about you finally growing up. After he left, I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it. Exhausted. I didn't know if he would really change or if those words would just be another attempt to escape responsibility. But either way, that was no longer my problem. For the first time, I felt that the weight I had always carried was starting to dissipate. Still, there was a small lump in my throat. A vestige of the pain of having to say no to my own family. Maybe deep down there was still a part of me that wanted to believe that they could change. But that didn't mean I was going to give up what I had achieved. I had my life to rebuild. And there was no room to go back. The days that followed Leo's visit were a mixture of relief and introspection. The conversation affected me more than I wanted to admit. But I knew that I couldn't let that distract me. I had a new life to take care of. And for the first time, I was the only one responsible for it. There was no one to interfere. No one I needed to prove anything to. My store was growing faster than I expected. The new collection, planned so carefully, was selling well. And I finally felt that all those sleepless nights were worth it. I started receiving messages from customers praising the products, sharing photos, and even stories about how sustainability had inspired them. It was more than a business. It was something I was building from scratch. With purpose. With meaning. I managed to rent a small apartment for myself. It was simple. But it was mine. Entering it on the first day with the moving boxes scattered around was like taking a deep breath after years of holding it in. I looked at the white walls and thought, this is freedom. For the first time, I was able to organize everything in my own way, without anyone judging, messing up, or belittling my choices. It wasn't just a space, it was a piece of my independence. Still, it wasn't always easy. There were days when loneliness hit me. Not the loneliness of not having anyone close, but the loneliness of cutting ties with my family. As much as the decision was right, there were times when I wondered if they thought about me, if they missed me. But those thoughts no longer paralyzed me. They came and went like waves, and I learned not to drown in them. One day, I received an unexpected message from an unknown number. It was a photo of my parents working at a street fair, probably selling something to supplement their income. The caption sent by Leo was short, "They are trying. I am too. Thanks for giving me the push I needed." I read the message several times. Leo seemed to be genuinely trying, but I knew it wasn't the time to get involved yet. I replied with a simple, "I hope they continue. They need it." It was the most I could offer at that moment. Forgiving was one thing, forgetting was something completely different. While Leo tried to find his own way, I delved into mine. Little by little, I managed to gather enough money to invest in more products and expand my store. I hired a small team to help with logistics and customer service. And suddenly, the routine of carrying everything on my shoulders began to feel lighter. I was building something solid. Something that no one could take away from me. Sometimes, while packing orders, I thought about the Clara of a few months ago, with her things scattered in the garden and tears burning her eyes. It was hard to believe that that was the same person who now lived in her own apartment with a business that was flourishing. It wasn't just a financial victory, it was a personal victory. A reminder that when we decide to leave behind what weighs us down, we find the strength that we didn't even know we had. One night, while looking at the view from the small balcony of my apartment, I received another unexpected call. This time, it was my mother. Her voice sounded different. There was no tone of pleading or attempt to manipulate that I had heard last time. Just a simple request. Clara, can we meet? Just the two of us? I promise I won't ask for anything. I just wanted to talk. My heart raced. I didn't know if I was ready for this type of conversation. But something in her voice seemed sincere. For the first time, I felt that maybe there was an opportunity to understand, if not completely forgive, what had happened. I replied with a hesitant, "Okay, let's set up a meeting." As I hung up, a mixed feeling of anxiety and curiosity took over me. I still didn't know what she had to tell me, but I knew that this meeting would change something. Maybe in me, maybe in her. The cafe where I had arranged to meet my mother was small, discreet, and almost empty that afternoon. I chose a table in the corner, from where I could observe the entrance without being noticed immediately. My heart was beating fast, but my expression remained neutral. I tried not to create expectations, but it was hard not to imagine what the reunion would be like, what she wanted to tell me, what I should say. When she came in, she seemed different. There was something more humble in her posture, almost a forced lightness, like someone carrying the weight of recent mistakes. She saw me, smiled shyly, and walked toward the table. When she sat down, I was surprised to notice that her hands were trembling slightly. She had never been the type of woman to show vulnerability. "Clara," she began without preamble. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. I didn't want to be the first to break the silence. I needed her to speak, to show the real reason why she was there. "I've thought a lot about everything that happened. About you. About Leo. About us as a family. And I realized that I made a lot of mistakes. We made a lot of mistakes." Her voice faltered a little, but she took a deep breath and continued. "You were always the responsible one. You were always there for us. And we never thanked you for it. I think we were so used to depending on you that we never stopped to see how much we were hurting you." Her words fell like small stones in a lake, creating ripples that expanded through my mind. Finally, after so many years, she acknowledged what I had carried. It wasn't a direct apology, but it was a start. "I see Leo trying to improve," she continued. "He's working. You know, he got a job at a construction materials store. It's not much, but it's a start. And he has helped us even with little. We are all trying to adjust." She paused, looking at her hands. "But none of this would have happened if you hadn't left. You forced us to face reality. I wanted to thank you for that. Even if it was painful." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to accept those words, to cling to them like a balm for the wounds I had carried for so long. But another, more cautious part reminded me that words don't erase years of negligence and injustice. "I didn't do it for you," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I did it for myself, because I couldn't take it anymore. And honestly, I don't know if I can forgive everything that happened. But I'm glad that you're trying to change. Just don't expect me to be the person who solves everything for you again." My mother nodded, her eyes tearful. "I don't expect that. I just wanted you to know that we recognize what we did and that we're trying to be better. For ourselves and for you too. If someday you want to let us be part of your life again." The conversation ended in an unexpectedly peaceful way. We said goodbye with a hesitant hug. Something that seemed more like a timid step towards something new than a total reconciliation. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that that conversation closed a cycle and opened another, healthier, or at least more honest one. I returned home with a lighter mind. My work continued to thrive. And I had achieved everything I had always wanted: independence, stability, peace. My apartment, which once seemed small and empty, was now a refuge where I could be completely myself. The store was growing every day, and I was already planning to expand it to a physical location. As for Leo, I knew that he was making progress. It wasn't a magical transformation, but he was beginning to carry the weight that had once been only mine. I found out that he had even started saving to help my parents more frequently. It was a start. It didn't mean that I fully trusted him, but it was enough for me to want him to continue on the right path. My parents also seemed to be changing. My mother went back to work, something she hadn't done in years. My father, despite the difficulties of age, found a way to contribute. They were learning to live without depending on me, and that was a victory I never thought I would see. While all of this was happening, I kept moving forward. I wasn't willing to erase the past, but I wouldn't let it tie me down either. Forgiving was a slow but possible process. And the biggest lesson I learned was that we don't need to carry the weight of everyone. Sometimes the best thing we can do is let go of what binds us and trust that in the void that remains, something new can grow. That night, while looking at the view from my small balcony lit by the city, I felt a peace that I hadn't experienced in a long time. The past was where it should be, behind me. And the future, well, it was all mine.